Good morning. Good afternoon?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Good afternoon. Montano and Meghan Angley here at Family Sports, the Avs practice facility. No podcast for us today. We got people all over the place, different countries, doing all kinds of different things. So no pod today, but there was just too much news for us to not stop and say something. So couple bits of news today that came up as we were here at practice as things kind of kept developing. But Meghan, let's start with the big one. Alex Galchenyik signs a 1-year, $750,000 deal with the Colorado Avalanche after spending, the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks on a PTO with the Colorado Eagles up in Loveland. First and foremost, before we get into the specifics of the signing and kind of what we've seen out of him in Loveland, Meghan, you and I were just talking. Jared Bednar said in training camp when Galchenyuk got hurt, we liked what we saw. We want to circle back around to him when he's healthy. That's exactly what they did.
It's exactly what they did. And there's a Galchenyuk piece coming. And I went back and actually listened to the availability Bednar did when Galchenyuk was released to hear the full statement about his thoughts about Galchenyuk. And it's exactly what we just said. He liked the camp. He thought that he was building chemistry with Newhook and Rodriguez. And he even pointed out that if there was a knock to Galchenyuk at the NHL level, it was his defensive game. And he felt, at least in camp, that that was an area that he was competitive and he was working hard on. And so everything that was said then remains true now, and it is really nice to see the organization follow through. Mm-hmm. And you could tell it means a lot to a player like Galchenyuk, who is looking to re-enter the NHL, but also has NHL pedigree that could have been tempted by other offers, other places. I think it's a testament to why he wants to be here and a willingness to be here, and an organization staying true to their word, I think, helps that. He
made some comments today in the locker room when we were talking to him saying, I'm very grateful to them just from the beginning. They gave me an opportunity in training camp. The defending Stanley Cup champions call you and say, hey, we'd like to get a look at you. And then, he did kind of go into what you're saying, not only then, but to then follow up after the injury and all that stuff. That's got to be a big vote of confidence for a player like him. Let's get a little bit into the specifics of a guy like Galchenyuk, because what you just said, look, he's a guy that's trying to reestablish his NHL career. It's kind of fizzled out over the last few. This is a former 30-goal scorer, former 50-point scorer in the NHL. That the Avs are now bringing back in. But like you said, that knock has been his defensive game. Meghan, you and I were talking, I think this was even yesterday, about Alex Galchenyuk and the potential that they could be signing him and bringing him in. But we have heard repeatedly he needs to improve his defensive game. He needs to figure out the defensive side of the game. How much do you think, just in some of the research that you've done here now in the last week, watching him with the Eagles, how much do you think that his, I don't want to be maybe too harsh here, lack of a defensive game has impacted his ability to stick in the NHL and maybe what led to the fact that there weren't a ton of suitors for him this summer?
This is something, too, that I don't think Galchenyuk would shy away from, because he addressed that he's aware this is an area of weakness in his game. He said it's held him back offensively because he has not earned trust and he's had ice time limited on other teams to where he can't produce, and that was what his identity once was, because he wasn't reliable defensively. And so he acknowledged how that has held him back and why it's important to sort of reinvent himself. He described it as a new era. He acknowledged that these last few seasons with NHL teams have been difficult for him, but that he's leaving that in the past. This is a new era. He is putting all his focus and attention to those details, specifically defensively in his game. And he talked about one reason he likes the fit here is the level of compete that is here. And on all accounts, from Cronin to Bednar, they talk about his level of compete too. And so the criticisms of him defensively are valid. It sounds as though he is coming here pretty blank slate, a lot of bad habits that he's just never been shown differently. And the way Cronin said it is he's not a bad defender, he just hasn't been taught how to defend properly. And so it's not only breaking bad habits, it's pointing them out to begin with. And so this baseline is kind of a clean slate that he's moving on upwards from, but the motivation on either side, like the organizational standpoint when it comes to compete and work ethic, is there for Galchenyuk too. And I think that is one way that this organization and the player complement one another.
No, and it's so funny, Meghan, because you see this type of stuff in the NHL all the time, right? Reclamation projects, and in most instances, I feel like probably in the majority of instances, they don't work out. And I feel like it's because it's a lot of what you've seen with Galchenyuk in the last few years. I don't have his elite prospects page in front of me, so I don't know exactly how many teams he's been on in the last 4 years, but I know it's at least 4, and I actually think it's more than 4.
6 in total.
6, yep. And I would be willing to bet that the conversation inside each one of those coaching rooms, meetings with GMs were, well, do you think we can get him to score some goals for us?
Right.
Can we get him out there just to produce some offense? And it sounds like there hasn't ever been a team that said, can we develop this player more? He had a 30-goal season, so everyone said, like, cool, development's done. He's ready to be an AHLer.
If we can just get the goal scoring.
Right. And it sounds like that's what everyone's plan was, but then that leads to what you were just saying. You're not relied on defensively to kill penalties, to be out there and, crunch time at the end of the game or whatever. And that it all just kind of like this vicious cycle. And you don't want to get too carried away, right, with the Avs organization. It's easy to be super hyped on them because they just won the cup, but like they've now got a little bit of a track record of taking these types of players who excel in one area, maybe have some deficiencies in other areas, and saying, cool, we're going to turn you into a more well-rounded player and put you in position to lean on what you've always been great about, or, great at. And Jared Bednar talked about that a little bit today, saying, look, we're going to get him on the power play. We think he can provide some offense. But he just spent 2-3 weeks in Loveland learning the system. Jared talked about his defensive game, and I think the compete level is a big deal. That's Jared Bednar told us a couple weeks ago with Alex Newhook. If he had any concerns about anybody's level of care,
right,
they wouldn't be on the team.
I think, too, that's one thing I'm excited to break down in the piece a little more specifically is when I say that he's been working on his defensive game, he has really been working on it. They did a development day, which is an extended practice, and he was working one-on-one with Cronin, specifically doing defensive drills, and there was a dialogue. He was asking questions, and Cronin was giving him feedback and showing him things. It was very hands-on, so not just the video work that Bednar talked about, but also the hands-on, one-on-one contact that he was getting, and the number of times that Val Nichushkin as a reclamation project has come up in this conversation is interesting because we talked about it too. The roles are almost swapped. Nichushkin entered the league as a first-round player that could check, and you're like, okay, well, he needs to be more than that. He needs to adapt his game to contribute in more ways than just the physical element of the game. And it took 2 seasons before, in that 3rd season here in Colorado, after scoring no goals with Dallas in his last year there, for him to break out and have the career year. So it didn't happen overnight, but it was a commitment to the player and the reclamation progress. And that's sort of what I think we're looking to Colorado to do with Galchenyuk. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's a commitment to the player to rehabilitate his identity and almost build anew from that goal scoring. Like that's the bottom of the food chain of priorities right now.
Yeah, and what I love about everything you're saying, I completely agree. And what makes you excited about it is one thing that Jared tells us all the time. It's one of my favorite things that he says that he tells players, whether it be young players, players that are slumping, whatever, put in the work. If you put in the work first, you will put yourself in positions to let your natural talents come through. That's why he tells us that when, new players come in, he points to Logan O'Connor, Andrew Cogliano, and Nathan McKinnon. You have three guys there who play really 3 different kind of roles. Cogliano and and LOC are kind of similar, but the point being they're at different stages of their career, but he points to those 3 guys saying, look at the work that they put in. And, I don't think there's any way you can look at Logan O'Connor right now and not saying, that's 100% true. He puts in the work every single shift, and due to some, injuries, some elevated opportunity, he's found himself in great situations to produce and pile up some points and stuff. And that's where I think, for me at least, I get excited with the idea of Galchenyuk. It's like, okay, cool. If they can get the rest of his game in order defensively, and that work ethic stays where it is, and he's willing to put in the work, and he's willing to buy in, you just dropped a former 30 goal scorer onto your roster. Like, this isn't a guy that you're hoping can jump, again, kind of like Newhook. We're hoping that we can, Nichushkin. We're hoping that we can get some offense out of him. We think he's got some offensive upside. This guy has huge offensive upside. We just got to get him there. We've got to get him somewhere that he can tap into that offense. And if you can get him anywhere close, you just added a lot of offense to your probably eventual bottom 6. But this is a really not even that big of a swing. I was going to say it's a big swing, but 1 year, $750K.
No.
Who cares?
And I think, too, previously in his career, he hasn't been on the doorstep, one leg in the doorstep of the AHL and the NHL to this degree. I think he has been teased in that place before, but I think that this is not like a rock bottom, but I think there's a recognition on his behalf that this is it for him to stick in the NHL, and there's no better reputable club to stick at than in Colorado. That has a lot of prestige, and I think he recognizes that too, and so it really is it for him. And I know people are probably curious what he's looked like in Loveland the last couple of weeks too, and I think it's a little hard to evaluate just based off of what I've seen so far, but it's not that the defensive side of his game is egregiously bad. It's just a little bit random, and I think it's because the instinct is not there because he's building it now right before our eyes, but there is some instinct, and so I don't expect him to be a total failure defensively. I think there are going to be mistakes that get made because he is still building his instinct defensively.
So I want to touch on a couple things that you just said there, and I think they kind of sum up Galchenyuk as a whole. Talking about he's never had to go earn his job in the AHL. You know what I mean? Like, to your point, like, he's never been this 1 foot in, 1 foot out. He's been a healthy scratch, sure, plenty, but there's never really been that threat of you're not going to be in the NHL. And I think some of that loops back to what we have talked about, and unfortunately sometimes we talk about it with the bad off ice stuff. But I think we can forget it applies to on ice as well. When was the last time someone told Alex Galchenyuk, you're just not good enough? Going back to what we were saying a minute ago, teams always brought him in, and I don't necessarily want to say preferential treatment because, again, he has been healthy scratched on a lot of occasions. But well, we're bringing him in because he can score goals. He doesn't need to learn the defensive side of the ice. We want him ozone starts. We want him shooting the puck. And he's maybe gotten some liberties in his career in terms of coaching because he's a natural goal scorer. He's got natural offensive upside. I think he was just shy of a goal per game in his time with the Eagles, and he had some nice finishes up there as well. Like, he's got that natural side to him, so I think he got a lot of kind of free passes on a lot of parts of the game growing up, and it's exciting. It's got to be exciting for him, like you said, to see coaching staff saying, no, we're committed to not just squeezing whatever goal scoring you have left in you out. We want to turn you into an NHL player. We want you to be part of this organization, and we want you to be the next Val Nichushkin. You know that they're talking about that. If they're talking about it with us, they're talking about it with him.
Exactly.
Like, this is what we want you to be. We want you to have your name on the cup in, this year, in 2 years, whatever, by getting to a point where you're as impactful as a guy like Val Nichushkin. And that's got to be motivating for a guy like Galchenyuk. And like I said, it's really not that big of a swing, and you hope that you can turn out a good player. If not, you're $750K in the hole for the rest of the year.
Not the biggest risk, and this is a lineup that has been stunned by injury. And I want to clarify that I don't think this was a decision made out of haste or desperation. I think they genuinely liked what they saw in Galchenyuk and felt he could add to the lineup right now. I don't think they would have made this decision because of the injury strictly. I think it's just convenient that he is ready, he is healthy, and there happen to be all these injuries. But I think that this decision gets made either way, and I don't think it's out of desperation.
I think that's a fantastic point. I think you're spot on, and I think the proof of that is he just spent however long up in Loveland. If this was something that was hasty and they just wanted a warm body for the NHL lineup, they would have skipped the PTO part. They would have just signed him to a deal and worked him into the lineup, stuff like that. But they said, no, we want to make sure that this is a good fit. He understands the systems, et cetera, et cetera. And how many guys did they call up over him when they could have easily signed him a week ago?
And Ben Meyers is still there. If they were just looking for a warm body who's familiar with the systems, can play center, has some defensive shortcomings, Ben Meyers is on an ELC, and he is just up the road. That is an easy plug-and-play player that they could have relied on. They chose Galchenyuk, and I think that's something not to underestimate, too.
I think that's a great point. Awesome for Galchenyuk, just as a person. It was good to see him back in here. You and I know, both said that, and AJ too. We had that conversation that I was bummed to see him get cut the way he did because I actually thought he had a nice camp. So it's nice to see him get rewarded. Nice to see the Avs follow through on that. Real quick, we'll kind of wrap this up, but right after Jared Bednar left the media room, we get news that Jean-Luc Foudy has been recalled from the Colorado Eagles. Let me first ask you this, Megan. Obviously, we joke and stuff like that on Twitter and on the show. But like, you have been a vocal supporter of Jean-Luc Foudy, the person. Did you see this coming at the beginning of the year? Like, if you would have had to place money, did Jean-Luc Foudy get an NHL game, yes or no, in training camp? What would you have said?
I said no. And I did in my bold predictions for the year, Shane Bowers and Oscar Olausson, I said I think they make an NHL debut. I did not have Foudy on my bingo card, and I thought those were already two pretty bold choices in the month of November alone. Yeah. We've seen Bowers, Kaut, Olausson, and now Foudy. I hope I'm not missing somebody in there.
No, Maltsev was, I think, October, but...
Ronta, too, was up there, like, in terms of young prospects, too, because, like, we know Meghan and McDonald, they're here, too. But to see those young players get chances, this is huge. I mean, we should have seen it coming because Bednar has talked about Foudy twice now, at least. Yeah,
at least, if not more than that. He's mentioned his name. So, like you said, maybe it's on us for being surprised, but I didn't see this coming. I don't want to say this is a huge change from what the Avs have done in the past, because I genuinely believe that they've done what's best and what's been part of their development plans for individual players, but it's hard not to say that there's been a change in philosophy, right? Where you're willing to just give Oscar Olausson a game to gauge where he's at.
Right.
And we just didn't see that in the past, or it didn't seem like we were seeing that in the past.
It felt like in call-up opportunities of the past, there was some hope or expectation that this player could stick if they show out well enough. But redefining what it means to call up a player and recognizing this is for reinforcement right now, we want to gauge where a player like Olausson is at. It's really transparent in what it is that they need from him right there. And I do think to that extent it is a little bit different. And so it doesn't apply unnecessary pressure to Olausson to stick in an NHL lineup right now. Understanding that it's just to gauge where he's at. I think it's similar with Foudy too, to see how he stacks up with NHL talent around him and against NHL talent as well. I think it's important to do that with players because you don't want to launch him for an NHL debut hoping he sticks, because then you begin to learn about where he still needs to improve in his game a little too late, because he needs to go back to Loveland after this and begin working on it there and maybe get some more chances throughout the year. Hopefully the injuries don't continue to persist.
Well, and it also gives you the opportunity to plug a guy in, at least for some extent of the game, where you would ideally like to see them. Like, we see them start Olausson on the second line a couple nights ago. Now, obviously, that ends up changing throughout the game with special teams and the way the game's going and so on and so forth, but gives you the opportunity to get a look at him there, and also know that, like, it's not the end of the world if you can't keep him on the second line all night. You got, 5 good shifts to see what he looked like there. And now how can he fill this maybe a little more limited role? He just didn't play for 10 minutes. How does he look when he jumps back on the ice? Is he keeping himself fresh? Is he keeping himself engaged? All just little things that I know that's maybe not what fans always want to see, but like, that's what goes into this. That's what goes into, we've just talked so much about developing a guy like Galchenyuk, Nichushkin, things like that. How many games early in his tenure with the Avs did Val Nichushkin sit for, the back half of the third period, or, the middle chunk of the game when special teams really, started to pile up and the game was close? You have to work your way through that. How engaged does a guy stay when he hasn't gotten a shift in 30 real-time minutes? And so I think it's fun because you can put them in situations to succeed, but you can also kind of put them in stressful situations, knowing that we're not looking for this guy to come out here and steal a job for the rest of the season. If he does that, great.
Yeah, says for the taking.
But that's not the expectation. And like you said, I think that takes some of the pressure off the player as well.
And Foudy's mysterious in terms of what his identity and role in an NHL lineup might be. So he's very important to plug into a lineup to start to imagine what that vision is like for him. It's not so different from Logan O'Connor, who in some of his first NHL games was also limited in ice time in a very similar way that I think we forget about sometimes. And he earned that by making himself indispensable and carving out a role for himself as a PK specialist. With Foudy, there are tools in his toolkit that do make him special, but he really does need to solidify what his NHL role would be. And this is a great opportunity to give coaches some insight.
No, 100%. It's just more information. It's more kind of like data points, if you will, for coaches to go on with young players. And again, if you want to call that a change of philosophy for the Avs, I guess I won't argue with that. If nothing else, it's a different approach to how they're gathering some of this data and some of this information, in terms of evaluating players. So, like we said at the start, an interesting news day for sure. Honestly, when I saw the practice announcement last night, I said, well, there's not really a ton going on. We just got our injury updates from Bednar, so we kind of know where everyone's at. Everything that we reported last week is there's no change in terms of injuries. Everything's kind of as they stated. So, I thought it'd be a slow news day. And as it turns out, yeah, you sign Alex Galchenyik, you call up Jean-Luc Foudy. Interesting times, if nothing else, around the Avs. You can't say it's dull right now.
Not at all. I'm excited, obviously, as it comes about because of injury. You're not excited about that, but it's a lot of different looks at guys you've wanted to see. Galchenyuk, Foudy, it's exciting. Yeah,
it's as Rudo put it the other day, the thinnest silver lining to all the injuries, but if you're really looking for one, there is a silver lining there. Jesse Montano and Meghan Angley here at Family Sports. Avs head out on the road for a 4-game trip. We'll be back at you guys tomorrow. Podcast, pregame show, postgame show, all that good stuff.